The Unholy is Evans Biliadopoulos' directorial debut, and before this he was mostly known for films such as Disney's remake of Beauty and the Beast and The Huntsman Winter's War. So naturally, I was pretty curious and excited to see how he could approach a horror film like this, with most of his previous filmography being fantasy films. Basically, this film revolves around a deaf woman named Alice who comes into contact with Virgin Mary, or at least supposedly, and all of a sudden is no longer deaf, and she is starting to perform miracles under Virgin Mary. And there is a journalist, played by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who's very skeptical of this. He wants to investigate, he wants to look deeper into it, and he wants to get a good, eye-catching story out of it, just like the rest of the press. But as he starts to look deeper into it, he starts to slowly realize that there's something more evil and sinister behind it. Needless to say, this film was a massive disappointment, but I will start off with some positives. This film has some really terrifying imagery, in some moments at least. There were actually moments of this film that really sent chills down my spine purely because of how terrifying the demon looked. The costume design here was excellent. This demon looked terrifying. Any moment that she was on screen, it was actually pretty unsettling. Combined that with the atmosphere, the lighting was set up brilliantly in certain scenes to where it actually could unsettle many audiences. It is a very chilling atmosphere overall. The camera work here is very smooth too, especially during some of the sequences of dialogue and how the angles change with the emotions they're feeling. That was brilliant. The overall visuals of this film were incredible, minus, I would say, one scene where a cross was burning and it was some pretty noticeably bad CGI that you could see through immediately. But really, other than that, I love this film from a visual standpoint. But that's about it. There are also a lot of negatives here. For one, this film is very exposition heavy. A majority of this film is literally just characters walking around or even just standing around and explaining things, or going into exposition to try and give the audience an idea of what could potentially happen, to try and build suspense, but the characters aren't interesting in any way, so you don't feel like there's anything at stake. The suspense here is really dry, and the only thing that even remotely builds suspense in this film is the flashback sequences, including the opening scene, which is probably the best scene in this entire film. And that's sad. I really think they had a great concept to work with, and they could have built so much suspense and atmosphere off of it, but it really fell short. The exposition in this film is so heavy, and it's very condescending, especially during a flashback sequence where they are literally explaining it as it's happening. They have a character telling you what is happening as it's being shown on screen. You can see what's happening. It's so condescending, and it really bothers me whenever a film does that, especially a horror film, where it could be used for suspense, where it could be used to just sit there, where the audience can just look at it as it's happening and be unsettled by it. But here, they're literally explaining it as it's happening, and it really takes away from the suspense. This film has a serious lack of originality, and they get very obvious about it, especially in the second act. There's literally a scene where they are at a church, and this guy is using this projector to show a few images and videos and explain the power of this demon. Literally exactly like The Conjuring, where Ed and Lorraine Warren are at a college campus, and they are showing a projector of videos on it and explaining the power of the demon. It's literally a copy and paste of that scene on here. There's also a scene where there is the journalist on his computer trying to analyze a frame of a video and find whatever the shadow is that looks really invisible, and then it's the demon, and it pops out and scares him. But that's it. It is literally a copy and paste of that jump scare scene from 2017's It, where the kids are looking at the projector and Pennywise is slowly starting to pop out. Literally the exact same scene, minus the fact that it's a computer and it's a demon popping out rather than Pennywise. But this film has a serious lack of originality, and they get way too obvious about it to where it really stands out, and it's frustrating. Another major issue with this film is the characters here are so messy. The journalist in this film is an asshole from the beginning. He is literally just a greedy, journalist who is there to exploit people. And he doesn't change, right up until the final act. And even then, his character development is so rushed to a point where it feels forced. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't flow within the story. So you don't actually care for his character at any point. And they don't want to make anything happen to the characters yet, so they fill up the runtime with a bunch of false jump scares where it all ends up with it being, oh, it was just a dream, rather than there actually being something there that you're supposed to be terrified of. Like many of the jump scares in The Conjuring and Insidious, that actually utilize their jump scares to terrify you, to build suspense. This film does neither of those things. It's just there to try and keep you interested, to try and fill up the runtime, and it feels so out of place. This film is just so messy in every way. This film is definitely not the worst by any means, but it definitely felt like they didn't know how to develop these characters, or to actually present a compelling narrative, so they just tried to fill up the runtime with a bunch of false jump scares to try and keep you interested. This is a massive flop of a film. I'm giving The Unholy a D. But as always, I hope you enjoyed this review. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you in the next video.